KaraokeBooks.
In Search of Lost Time. Swann's Way. Marcel Proust. Translated by C.K.Scott-Moncrieff. It was true that she claimed to be fond of antiques, and used to assume a rapturous and knowing air when she confessed how she loved to spend the whole day rummaging in second-hand shops, hunting for bric-a-brac and things of the right date. Although it was a point of honor to which she obstinately clung, as though obeying some old family custom, that she should never answer any questions, never give any account of what she did during the daytime, she spoke to Swann once about a friend to whose house she had been invited, and had found that everything in it was of the period. Swann could not get her to tell him what period it was. Only after thinking the matter over she replied that it was medieval, by which she meant that the walls were paneled. Some time later she spoke to him again of her friend, and added, in the hesitating but confident tone in which one refers to a person whom one has met somewhere, at dinner, the night before, of whom one had never heard until then, but whom one's hosts seemed to regard as someone so celebrated and important that one hopes that one's listener will know quite well who is meant, and will be duly impressed. Her dining room is 18th century. Incidentally, she had thought it hideous, all bare, as though the house were still unfinished. Women looked frightful in it, and it would never become the fashion. She mentioned it again, a third time, when she showed Swann a card with the name and address of the man who had designed the dining room, and whom she wanted to send for, when she had enough money, to see whether he could not do one for her too. Not one like that, of course, but one of the sort she used to dream of, one which, unfortunately, her little house would not be large enough to contain, with tall sideboards, Renaissance furniture and fireplaces like the chateau at Blois. It was on this occasion that she let out to Swann what she really thought of his abode on the Quai d'Orléans. He having ventured the criticism that her friend had indulged, not in the Louis XVI style, for, he went on, although that was not, of course, done, still it might be made charming, but in the sham antique. You wouldn't have her live, like you, among a lot of broken-down chairs and threadbare carpets. She exclaimed, the innate respectability of the middle-class housewife rising impulsively to the surface through the acquired dilettantism of the light woman. People who enjoyed picking up things, who admired poetry, despised sordid calculations of profit and loss, and nourished ideals of honor and love, she placed in a class by themselves, superior to the rest of humanity. There was no need actually to have those tastes, provided one talked enough about them. When a man had told her at dinner that he loved to wander about and get his hands all covered with dust in the old furniture shops, that he would never be really appreciated in this commercial age, since he was not concerned about the things that interested it, and that he belonged to another generation altogether, she would come home saying, "Why, he's an adorable creature, so sensitive." I had no idea, and she would conceive for him a strong and sudden friendship. But, on the other hand, men who, like Swann, had these tastes but did not speak of them, left her cold. She was obliged, of course, to admit that Swann was most generous with his money, but she would add, pouting, "It's not the same thing, you see, with him," and, as a matter of fact, what appealed to her imagination was not the practice of disinterestedness but its vocabulary. Feeling that, often, he could not give her in reality the pleasures of which she dreamed, he tried at least to ensure that she should be happy in his company, tried not to contradict those vulgar ideas, that bad taste which she displayed on every possible occasion, which all the same he loved, as he could not help loving everything that came from her, which even fascinated him, for were they not so many more of those characteristic features, by virtue of which the essential qualities of the woman emerged, and were made visible? And so, when she was in a happy mood because she was going to see the rain tapes, or when her eyes grew serious, troubled, petulant, if she was afraid of missing the flower show, or merely of not being in time for tea, with muffins and toast, at the Rue Royale tea rooms, where she believed that regular attendance was indispensable, and set the seal upon a woman's certificate of smartness, Swann, enraptured, as all of us are, at times, by the natural behavior of a child, or by the likeness of a portrait, which appears to be on the point of speaking, would feel so distinctly the soul of his mistress rising to fill the outlines of her face that he could not refrain from going across and welcoming it with his lips. "Oh, then, so little Odette wants us to take her to the flower show, does she? She wants to be admired, does she? Very well, we will take her there, we can but obey her wishes." As Swann's sight was beginning to fail, he had to resign himself to a pair of spectacles, which he wore at home, when working, while to face the world he adopted a single eyeglass, as being less disfiguring. The first time that she saw it in his eye, she could not contain herself for joy. "I really do think, for a man, that is to say, it is tremendously smart. How nice you look with it. Every inch a gentleman. All you want now is a title," she concluded, with a tinge of regret in her voice. He liked Odette to say these things, just as, if he had been in love with a Breton girl, he would have enjoyed seeing her in her coif and hearing her say that she believed in ghosts. Always until then, as is common among men whose taste for the fine arts develops independently of their sensuality, a grotesque disparity had existed between the satisfactions which he would accord to either taste simultaneously. Yielding to the seduction of works of art which grew more and more subtle as the women in whose company he enjoyed them grew more illiterate in common, he would take a little servant girl to a screened box in a theater where there was some decadent piece which he had wished to see performed, or to an exhibition of impressionist painting, with the conviction, moreover, that an educated, society woman would have understood them no better, but would not have managed to keep quiet about them so prettily. But, now that he was in love with Odette, all this was changed. To share her sympathies, to strive to be one with her in spirit was a task so attractive that he tried to find satisfaction in the things that she liked, and did find a pleasure, not only in copying her habits but in adopting her opinions, which was all the deeper because, as those habits and opinions sprang from no roots in her intelligence, they suggested to him nothing except that love, for the sake of which he had preferred them to his own. If he went again to Serge Panine, if he looked out for opportunities of going to watch Olivier Maitre conducting, it was for the pleasure of being initiated into every one of the ideas in Odette's mind, of feeling that he had an equal share in all her tastes. This charm of drawing him closer to her, which her favorite plays and pictures and places possessed, struck him as being more mysterious than the intrinsic charm of more beautiful things and places, which appealed to him by their beauty, but without recalling her. Besides, having allowed the intellectual beliefs of his youth to grow faint, until his skepticism, as a finished man of the world, had gradually penetrated them unawares, he held, or at least he had held for so long that he had fallen into the habit of saying, that the objects which we admire have no absolute value in themselves, that the whole thing is a matter of dates and castes, and consists in a series of fashions, the most vulgar of which are worth just as much as those which are regarded as the most refined. And as he had decided that the importance which Odette attached to receiving cards for a private view was not in itself any more ridiculous than the pleasure which he himself had at one time felt in going to luncheon with the Prince of Wales, so he did not think that the admiration which she professed for Monte Carlo or for the Rigi was any more unreasonable than his own liking for Holland, which she imagined as ugly, and for Versailles, which bored her to tears. And so he denied himself the pleasure of visiting those places, consoling himself with the reflection that it was for her sake that he wished to feel, to like nothing that was not equally felt and liked by her. Like everything else that formed part of Odette's environment, and was no more, in a sense, than the means whereby he might see and talk to her more often, he enjoyed the society of the Verdurins. With them, since, at the heart of all their entertainments, dinners, musical evenings, games, suppers in fancy dress, excursions to the country, theater parties, even the infrequent, big evenings, when they entertained, bores, there were the presence of Odette, the sight of Odette, conversation with Odette, an inestimable boon which the Verdurins, by inviting him to their house, bestowed on Swann. He was happier in the little nucleus than anywhere else, and tried to find some genuine merit in each of its members, imagining that his tastes would lead him to frequent their society for the rest of his life. Never daring to whisper to himself, lest he should doubt the truth of the suggestion, that he would always be in love with Odette, at least when he tried to suppose that he would always go to the Verdurins, a proposition which, a priori, raised fewer fundamental objections on the part of his intelligence. He saw himself for the future continuing to meet Odette every evening. That did not, perhaps, come quite to the same thing as his being permanently in love with her, but for the moment while he was in love with her, to feel that he would not, one day, cease to see her was all that he could ask. What a charming atmosphere, he said to himself. How entirely genuine life is to these people. They are far more intelligent, far more artistic, surely, than the people one knows. Me. Verdurin, in spite of a few trifling exaggerations which are rather absurd, has a sincere love of painting and music. What a passion for works of art, what anxiety to give pleasure to artists. Her ideas about some of the people one knows are not quite right, but then their ideas about artistic circles are altogether wrong. Possibly I make no great intellectual demands upon conversation, but I am perfectly happy talking to Cottard, although he does trot out those idiotic puns. And as for the painter, if he is rather unpleasantly affected when he tries to be paradoxical, still he has one of the finest brains that I have ever come across. Besides, what is most important, one feels quite free there, one does what one likes without constraint or fuss. What a flow of humor there is every day in that drawing room. Certainly, with a few rare exceptions, I never want to go anywhere else again. It will become more and more of a habit, and I shall spend the rest of my life among them. And as the qualities which he supposed to be an intrinsic part of the Verdurin character were no more, really, than their superficial reflection of the pleasure which had been enjoyed in their society by his love for Odette, those qualities became more serious, more profound, more vital, as that pleasure increased. Since me. Verdurin gave Swann, now and then, what alone could constitute his happiness, since, on an evening when he felt anxious because Odette had talked rather more to one of the party than to another, and, in a spasm of irritation, would not take the initiative by asking her whether she was coming home, me. Verdurin brought peace and joy to his troubled spirit by the spontaneous exclamation, Odette. You'll see Swann home, won't you? Since, when the summer holidays came, and after he had asked himself uneasily whether Odette might not leave Paris without him, whether he would still be able to see her every day, me. Verdurin was going to invite them both to spend the summer with her in the country. Swann, unconsciously allowing gratitude and self-interest to filter into his intelligence and to influence his ideas, went so far as to proclaim that me. Verdurin was a great and noble soul. Should any of his old fellow pupils in the Louvre School of Painting speak to him of some rare or eminent artist, I'd 100 times rather, he would reply, have the Verdurins. And, with a solemnity of diction which was new in him, they are magnanimous creatures, and magnanimity is, after all, the one thing that matters, the one thing that gives us distinction here on earth. Look you, there are only two classes of men, the magnanimous and the rest. And I have reached an age when one has to take sides, to decide once and for all whom one is going to like and dislike, to stick to the people one likes, and, to make up for the time one has wasted with the others, never to leave them again as long as one lives. Very well, he went on, with the slight emotion which a man feels when, even without being fully aware of what he is doing, he says something, not because it is true but because he enjoys saying it, and listens to his own voice uttering the words as though they came from someone else. The die is now cast. I have elected to love none but magnanimous souls, and to live only in an atmosphere of magnanimity. You ask me whether me. Verdurin is really intelligent. I can assure you that she has given me proofs of a nobility of heart, of a loftiness of soul, to which no one could possibly attain. How could they, without a corresponding loftiness of mind? Without question, she has a profound understanding of art. But it is not, perhaps, in that she is most admirable. Every little action, ingeniously, exquisitely kind, which she has performed for my sake, every friendly attention, simple little things, quite domestic and yet quite sublime, reveal a more profound comprehension of existence than all your textbooks of philosophy. He might have reminded himself, all the same, that there were various old friends of his family who were just as simple as the Verdurins, companions of his early days who were just as fond of art, that he knew other great-hearted creatures, and that, nevertheless, since he had cast his vote in favor of simplicity, the arts, and magnanimity, he had entirely ceased to see them. But these people did not know Odette, and, if they had known her, would never have thought of introducing her to him. And so there was probably not, in the whole of the Verdurin circle, a single one of the faithful who loved them, or believed that he loved them, as dearly as did Swann. And yet, when M. Verdurin said that he was not satisfied with Swann, he had not only expressed his own sentiments, he had unwittingly discovered his wife's. Doubtless Swann had too particular an affection for Odette, as to which he had failed to take me. Verdurin daily into his confidence. Doubtless the very discretion with which he availed himself of the Verdurins' hospitality, refraining, often, from coming to dine with them for a reason which they never suspected, and in place of which they saw only an anxiety on his part not to have to decline an invitation to the house of some bore or other, doubtless, also, and despite all the precautions which he had taken to keep it from them, the gradual discovery which they were making of his brilliant position in society. Doubtless all these things contributed to their general annoyance with Swann. But the fundamental reason was quite different. What had happened was that they had at once discovered in him a locked door, a reserved, impenetrable chamber in which he still professed silently to himself that the Princess de Sagan was not grotesque, and that Cottard's jokes were not amusing. In a word, and for all that he never once abandoned his friendly attitude towards them all, or revolted from their dogmas, they had discovered an impossibility of imposing those dogmas upon him, of entirely converting him to their faith, the like of which they had never come across in anyone before. They would have forgiven his going to the houses of bores, to whom, as it happened, in his heart of hearts he infinitely preferred the Verdurins and all their little nucleus, had he consented to set a good example by openly renouncing those bores in the presence of the faithful. But that was an abjuration which, as they well knew, they were powerless to extort. What a difference was there in a newcomer whom Odette had asked them to invite, although she herself had met him only a few times, and on whom they were building great hopes, the Comte de Forcheval. It turned out that he was nothing more nor less than the brother-in-law of Saniette, a discovery which filled all the faithful with amazement. The manners of the old paleographer were so humble that they had always supposed him to be of a class inferior, socially, to their own, and had never expected to learn that he came of a rich and relatively aristocratic family. Of course, Forcheval was enormously the swell, which Swann was not or had quite ceased to be. Of course, he would never dream of placing, as Swann now placed, the Verdurin circle above any other. But he lacked that natural refinement which prevented Swann from associating himself with the criticisms, too obviously false to be worth his notice, that me. Verdurin leveled at people whom he knew. As for the vulgar and affected tirades in which the painter sometimes indulged, the bagman's pleasantries which Cottard used to hazard, whereas Swann, who liked both men sincerely, could easily find excuses for these without having either the courage or the hypocrisy to applaud them, Forcheval, on the other hand, was on an intellectual level which permitted him to be stupefied, amazed by the invective, without in the least understanding what it all was about, and to be frankly delighted by the wit. And the very first dinner at the Verdurins at which Forcheval was present threw a glaring light upon all the differences between them, made his qualities start into prominence and precipitated the disgrace of Swann. There was, at this dinner, besides the usual party, a professor from the Sorbonne, one Brichot who had met M. and me. Verdurin at a watering place somewhere, and, if his duties at the university and his other works of scholarship had not left him with very little time to spare, would gladly have come to them more often. For he had that curiosity, that superstitious outlook on life, which, combined with a certain amount of skepticism with regard to the object of their studies, earn for men of intelligence, whatever their profession, for doctors who do not believe in medicine, for schoolmasters who do not believe in Latin exercises, the reputation of having broad, brilliant, and indeed superior minds. He affected, when at me. Verdurin's, to choose his illustrations from among the most topical subjects of the day, when he spoke of philosophy or history, principally because he regarded those sciences as no more, really, than a preparation for life itself, and imagined that he was seeing put into practice by the little clan what hitherto he had known only from books. And also, perhaps, because, having had drilled into him as a boy, and having unconsciously preserved a feeling of reverence for certain subjects, he thought that he was casting aside the scholar's gown when he ventured to treat those subjects with a conversational license, which seemed so to him only because the folds of the gown still clung. Early in the course of the dinner, when M. de Forcheville, seated on the right of me, Verdurin, who, in the newcomer's honor, had taken great pains with her toilet, observed to her, quite original, that white dress. The doctor, who had never taken his eyes off him, so curious was he to learn the nature and attributes of what he called a da, and was on the lookout for an opportunity of attracting his attention, so as to come into closer contact with him, caught in its flight the adjective, Blanche, and, his eyes still glued to his plate, snapped out, Blanche. Blanche of Castile, then, without moving his head, shot a furtive glance to right and left of him, doubtful, but happy on the whole. While Swann, by the painful and futile effort which he made to smile, testified that he thought the pun absurd, Forcheville had shown at once that he could appreciate its subtlety, and that he was a man of the world, by keeping within its proper limits a mirth the spontaneity of which had charmed me. Verdurin. What are you to say of a scientist like that? She asked Forcheville. You can't talk seriously to him for 2 minutes on end. Is that the sort of thing you tell them at your hospital? She went on, turning to the doctor. They must have some pretty lively times there, if that's the case. I can see that I shall have to get taken in as a patient. I think I heard the doctor speak of that wicked old humbug, Blanche of Castile, if I may so express myself. Am I not right, madam? Brichot appealed to me. Verdurin, who, swooning with merriment, her eyes tightly closed, had buried her face in her 2 hands, from between which, now and then, escaped a muffled scream. Good gracious, madam, I would not dream of shocking the reverent-minded, if there are any such around this table, sub rosa. I recognize, moreover, that our ineffable and Athenian, oh, how infinitely Athenian, republic is capable of honoring, in the person of that obscurantist old she-capet, the first of our chiefs of police. Yes, indeed, my dear host, yes, indeed, he repeated in his ringing voice, which sounded a separate note for each syllable, in reply to a protest by M. Verdurin. The Chronicle of Saint Denis, and the authenticity of its information is beyond question, leaves us no room for doubt on that point. No one could be more fitly chosen as patron by a secularizing proletariat than that mother of a saint, who let him see some pretty fishy saints besides, as Sugar says, and other great street Bernards of the sort, for with her it was a case of taking just what you pleased. Who is that gentleman? Forcheville asked me. Verdurin. He seems to speak with great authority. What? Do you mean to say you don't know the famous Brichot? Why, he's celebrated all over Europe. Oh, that's Brachot, is it? Exclaimed Forcheville, who had not quite caught the name. You must tell me all about him, he went on, fastening a pair of goggle eyes on the celebrity. It's always interesting to meet well-known people at dinner. But, I say, you ask us to very select parties here. No dull evenings in this house, I'm sure. Well, you know what it is really, said me. Verdurin modestly. They feel safe here. They can talk about whatever they like, and the conversation goes off like fireworks. Now Brichot, this evening, is nothing. I've seen him, don't you know, when he's been with me, simply dazzling. You'd want to go on your knees to him. Well, with anyone else he's not the same man. He's not in the least witty, you have to drag the words out of him. He's even boring. That's strange, remarked Forcheville with fitting astonishment. A sort of wit like Brichot's would have been regarded as out-and-out stupidity by the people among whom Swann had spent his early life, for all that it is quite compatible with real intelligence. And the intelligence of the professor's vigorous and well-nourished brain might easily have been envied by many of the people in society who seemed witty enough to Swann. But these last had so thoroughly inculcated into him their likes and dislikes, at least in everything that pertained to their ordinary social existence, including that annex to social existence which belongs, strictly speaking, to the domain of intelligence, namely, conversation, that Swann could not see anything in Brichot's pleasantries. To him they were merely pedantic, vulgar, and disgustingly coarse. He was shocked, too, being accustomed to good manners, by the rude, almost barrack-room tone which this student in arms adopted, no matter to whom he was speaking. Finally, perhaps, he had lost all patience that evening as he watched me. Verdurin welcoming, with such unnecessary warmth, this forceful fellow, whom it had been Odette's unaccountable idea to bring to the house. Feeling a little awkward, with Swann there also, she had asked him on her arrival, "What do you think of my guest?" And he, suddenly realizing for the first time that Forcheville, whom he had known for years, could actually attract a woman, and was quite a good specimen of a man, had retorted, "Beastly." He had, certainly, no idea of being jealous of Odette, but did not feel quite so happy as usual, and when Brichot, having begun to tell them the story of Blanche of Castile's mother, who, according to him, had been with Henry Plantagenet for years before they were married, tried to prompt Swann to beg him to continue the story, by interjecting, "Isn't that so, M.?" Swann, in the martial accents which one uses in order to get down to the level of an unintelligent rustic or to put the fear of God into a trooper, Swann cut his story short, to the intense fury of their hostess, by begging to be excused for taking so little interest in Blanche of Castile, as he had something that he wished to ask the painter. He, it appeared, had been that afternoon to an exhibition of the work of another artist, also a friend of me, Verdurin, who had recently died, and Swann wished to find out from him, for he valued his discrimination, whether there had really been anything more in this later work than the virtuosity which had struck people so forcibly in his earlier exhibitions. From that point of view it was extraordinary, but it did not seem to me to be a form of art which you could call elevated, said Swann with a smile. Elevated. To the height of an institute, interrupted Cottard, raising his arms with mock solemnity. The whole table burst out laughing. "What did I tell you?" said me. Verdurin to Forcheville. "It's simply impossible to be serious with him. When you least expect it, out he comes with a joke." But she observed that Swann, and Swann alone, had not unbent. For one thing he was none too well pleased with Cottard for having secured a laugh at his expense in front of Forcheville. But the painter, instead of replying in a way that might have interested Swann, as he would probably have done had they been alone together, preferred to win the easy admiration of the rest by exercising his wit upon the talent of their dead friend. "I went up to one of them," he began, "just to see how it was done. I stuck my nose into it. Yes, I don't think. Impossible to say whether it was done with glue, with soap, with sealing wax, with sunshine, with leaven, with excrem. And one make 12, shouted the doctor, wittily, but just too late, for no one saw the point of his interruption. "It looks as though it were done with nothing at all," resumed the painter. "No more chance of discovering the trick than there is in the Night Watch, or the Regents, and it's even bigger work than either Rembrandt or Hals ever did. It's all there, and yet, no, I'll take my oath it isn't." Then, just as singers who have reached the highest note in their compass proceed to hum the rest of the air in falsetto, he had to be satisfied with murmuring, smiling the while, as if, after all, there had been something irresistibly amusing in the sheer beauty of the painting. "It smells all right. It makes your head go round. It catches your breath. You feel ticklish all over, and not the faintest clue to how it's done. The man's a sorcerer. The thing's a conjuring trick. It's a miracle," bursting outright into laughter, "it's dishonest." Then stopping, solemnly raising his head, pitching his voice on a double bass note which he struggled to bring into harmony, he concluded, and it's so loyal. Except at the moment when he had called it bigger than the night watch, a blasphemy which had called forth an instant protest from me. Verdurin, who regarded the night watch as the supreme masterpiece of the universe, conjointly with the ninth and the Samothrace, and at the word excrement, which had made Forcheval throw a sweeping glance round the table to see whether it was all right, before he allowed his lips to curve in a prudish and conciliatory smile. All the party, save Swann, had kept their fascinated and adoring eyes fixed upon the painter. "I do so love him when he goes up in the air like that," cried me. Verdurin, the moment that he had finished, enraptured that the table talk should have proved so entertaining on the very night that Forcheval was dining with them for the first time. "Hello, you." She turned to her husband. "What's the matter with you? Sitting there gaping like a great animal. You know, though, don't you," she apologized for him to the painter, "that he can talk quite well when he chooses. Anybody would think it was the first time he had ever listened to you. If you had only seen him while you were speaking, he was just drinking it all in. And tomorrow he will tell us everything you said, without missing a word." "No, really, I'm not joking," protested the painter, enchanted by the success of his speech. "You all look as if you thought I was pulling your legs, that it was just a trick. I'll take you to see the show, and then you can say whether I've been exaggerating. I'll bet you anything you like, you'll come away more up in the air than I am. But we don't suppose for a moment that you're exaggerating. We only want you to go on with your dinner, and my husband too. Give M. Biche some more soul, can't you see his has got cold? We're not in any hurry. You're dashing round as if the house was on fire. Wait a little, don't serve the salad just yet." Me. Cottard, who was a shy woman and spoke but seldom, was not lacking, for all that, in self-assurance when a happy inspiration put the right word in her mouth. She felt that it would be well received. The thought gave her confidence, and what she was doing was done with the object not so much of shining herself, as of helping her husband on in his career. And so she did not allow the word salad, which me. Verdurin had just uttered, to pass unchallenged. "It's not a Japanese salad, is it?" she whispered, turning towards Odette. And then, in her joy and confusion at the combination of neatness and daring which there had been in making so discreet and yet so unmistakable an allusion to the new and brilliantly successful play by Dumas, she broke down in a charming, girlish laugh, not very loud, but so irresistible that it was some time before she could control it. "Who is that lady?" "She seems devilish clever," said Forcheval. "No, it is not. But we will have one for you if you will all come to dinner on Friday." "You will think me dreadfully provincial, sir," said me. Cottard to Swann, "But, do you know, I haven't been yet to this famous France salon that everybody's talking about. The doctor has been, I remember now. He told me what a very great pleasure it had been to him to spend the evening with you there. And I must confess, I don't see much sense in spending money on seats for him to take me, when he's seen the play already. Of course an evening at the Théâtre Français is never wasted, really, the acting's so good there always, but we have some very nice friends, me." Cottard would hardly ever utter a proper name, but restricted herself to, "some friends of ours," or, "one of my friends," as being more distinguished, speaking in an affected tone and with all the importance of a person who need give names only when she chooses, who often have a box, and are kind enough to take us to all the new pieces that are worth going to. And so I'm certain to see this France salon sooner or later, and then I shall know what to think. But I do feel such a fool about it, I must confess, for, whenever I pay a call anywhere, I find everybody talking. It's only natural, about that wretched Japanese salad. Really and truly, one's beginning to get just a little tired of hearing about it," she went on, seeing that Swann seemed less interested than she had hoped in so burning a topic. "I must admit, though, that it's sometimes quite amusing, the way they joke about it. I've got a friend, now, who is most original, though she's really a beautiful woman, most popular in society, goes everywhere, and she tells me that she got her cook to make one of these Japanese salads, putting in everything that young M. Dumas says you're to put in the play. Then she asked just a few friends to come and taste it. I was not among the favored few, I'm sorry to say. But she told us all about it on her next day. It seems it was quite horrible. She made us all laugh till we cried. I don't know, perhaps it was the way she told it, me. Cottard added doubtfully, seeing that Swann still looked grave. And, imagining that it was, perhaps, because he had not been amused by Francelon. Well, I dare say I shall be disappointed with it, after all. I don't suppose it's as good as the piece me. De Crécy worships, Serge Panine. There's a play, if you like, so deep, makes you think. But just fancy giving a receipt for a salad on the stage of the Théâtre Français. Now, Serge Panine. But then, it's like everything that comes from the pen of M. Georges Honnête, it's so well written. I wonder if you know the Maître des Forges, which I like even better than Serge Panine. Pardon me, said Swann with polite irony, but I can assure you that my want of admiration is almost equally divided between those masterpieces. Really, now, that's very interesting. And what don't you like about them? Won't you ever change your mind? Perhaps you think he's a little too sad. Well, what I always say is, one should never argue about plays or novels. Everyone has his own way of looking at things, and what may be horrible to you is, perhaps, just what I like best. She was interrupted by Forcheville's addressing Swann. What had happened was that, while me, Cottard was discussing Francelon, Forcheville had been expressing to me Verdurin his admiration for what he called the little speech of the painter. Your friend has such a flow of language, such a memory, he had said to her when the painter had come to a standstill. I've seldom seen anything like it. He'd make a first-rate preacher. By Jove, I wish I was like that. What with him and M. Brachot, you've drawn 2 lucky numbers tonight, though I'm not so sure that, simply as a speaker, this one doesn't knock spots off the professor. It comes more naturally with him, less like reading from a book. Of course, the way he goes on, he does use some words that are a bit realistic, and all that. But that's quite the thing nowadays. Anyhow, it's not often I've seen a man hold the floor as cleverly as that, hold the spittoon, as we used to say in the regiment, where, by the way, we had a man he rather reminds me of. You could take anything you liked, I don't know what, this glass, say, and he'd talk away about it for hours. No, not this glass. That's a silly thing to say, I'm sorry. But something a little bigger, like the Battle of Waterloo, or anything of that sort. He'd tell you things you simply wouldn't believe. Why, Swann was in the regiment then. He must have known him. Do you see much of M. Swann? Asked me, Verdurin.
If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to the channel.